My son Leo's last words to me weren't, "I love you." They were a promise, whispered past the hiss of an oxygen machine in a sterile hospital room. "I'll take care of you, Dad, no matter what." I clung to those words during his funeral, a flimsy shield against the cold Seattle rain and the even colder glare of his wife, Chloe. She stood beside me, not a single tear in her eyes, already planning her new life. A life that, just hours later, would involve kicking me out of the home I'd shared with my dying son, leaving me penniless on the street. She thought she had won. She thought she had everything. She didn't know my son's final plan. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The cold rain soaking through my funeral suit felt warm compared to the ice in Chloe's eyes. As I stood at the door of the house my son had bought, the house where I had spent the last 18 months nursing him, she pushed 3 cardboard boxes into my chest. "This is my house now, Michael," she said, her voice as crisp and clean as a freshly signed check. "I need you to leave. Today." The memory of Leo's promise echoed in my head, a cruel counterpoint to the finality of the deadbolt clicking shut. "I'll take care of you, Dad." Yet here I was, 66 years old, a widower who had buried his only child this morning and now officially homeless. What I didn't know was that while Chloe had just executed the first step of her plan, she had also triggered the first step of my son's. The funeral service had been a blur of sorrowful faces and muted platitudes. I remembered standing at the pulpit, my voice cracking as I read the eulogy for my brilliant boy, the engineer who had built a tech empire from nothing. I spoke of his first model airplane, painted a defiant purple, and his unshakable belief in building a better world. Through my own tear-filled vision, I saw Chloe in the front pew, not weeping, but tapping a perfectly manicured nail against her phone screen. She was checking the time. The drive back from the cemetery was suffocatingly silent. She didn't turn on the radio. The rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers was the only sound, counting down the seconds to my eviction. I thought she would at least wait a day, maybe a week. Give me time to grieve, to breathe. But greed doesn't wait for grief. "My things?" I had stammered, looking at the hastily packed boxes by the door. They contained so little. A few changes of clothes, my late wife's photo album, and the small toolbox Leo had bought me for my last birthday. "Everything else was part of the house," Chloe stated, pulling her designer coat tighter around herself. "And the house is mine." There was no arguing. The cruelty was so absolute, so breathtaking, that it paralyzed me. This was the woman Leo had loved, the woman he'd built a life for. While he was fighting for every last breath, she had been planning this, every detail. I didn't beg, I didn't plead. My pride, the same stubborn pride I'd passed down to my son, wouldn't allow it. I simply picked up the 3 boxes, my knuckles brushing against the rain-slicked wood of the front door. I carried what was left of my life down the porch steps, my old Honda Civic looking pitifully small in the driveway of the grand Seattle home. She watched from the window, a silhouette framed by the warm, inviting light within. She didn't move until I had closed the trunk. The click of the deadbolt was the last sound I heard from her. Standing on the curb, with the rain plastering my gray hair to my scalp, a profound emptiness washed over me. It was over. I had lost him, and now I had lost everything else. The world felt vast and indifferent, and for the first time in my life, I had absolutely nowhere to go. The old Honda's engine hummed a mournful tune as I drove through the glittering, rain-slicked streets of Seattle. For hours, I just drove. I passed landmarks that held a lifetime of memories. The park where Leo took his first steps, the ice cream shop we'd visited after his college acceptance, the gleaming glass tower of his company, Innovate Dynamics, a monument to a life cut brutally short. Tonight, the city I had called home for 40 years felt like a foreign country, its lights mocking my solitary darkness. My car, once just a tool for transportation, had become my entire world, a 4-wheeled steel shell protecting me from the cold and my own crushing reality. Eventually, exhaustion began to set in, a heavy, bone-deep weariness that grief alone couldn't account for. I saw the flickering neon sign of a motel, its promise of a warm bed feeling like an impossible luxury. The night clerk, a young man with tired eyes, barely looked up from his phone as I slid my credit card across the counter. He ran it once, then twice. A frown creased his brow. Declined, he said, not with malice, but with a flat finality that was somehow worse. He pushed the card back toward me. You got another one? I stared at the useless piece of plastic. It was a joint account I'd shared with Leo, one he'd insisted on setting up so I'd never have to worry about money while caring for him. Chloe. Of course. She hadn't just kicked me out. She had cut me off completely. Shame burned my cheeks. I mumbled an apology and retreated to my car, the clerk's indifferent gaze following me out the door. There was only one person left to call. I pulled over in the deserted parking lot of a 24-hour supermarket and dialed Eleanor's number. Her voice was a warm blanket in the cold car. Michael? Oh, thank God. Where are you? I've been so worried. I'm okay, Elle. I lied, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. Don't you dare tell me you're okay, she retorted, her nurse's intuition cutting through my pretense. You come straight over here. The guest room is ready. Tears pricked my eyes. For a moment I was tempted, but the thought of showing up on her doorstep, a pathetic old man with 3 boxes of belongings to his name, was more than my pride could bear. I'll be fine, Elle. I just need a night to think. She argued, but I was firm. After I hung up, the silence in the car was deafening. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go, the worn fabric, a poor substitute for a mattress. I pulled one of the cardboard boxes onto the passenger seat and opened it. On top lay a photo of a 10-year-old Leo, beaming with pride as he held up a purple model airplane. I pulled my thin coat tighter, the chill of the night seeping through the glass. Cradling the box of memories like a life raft, I closed my eyes, the rhythm of the rain on the roof my only lullaby. I had nothing. No home, no money, and no plan for what I would do when the sun rose. I awoke to the harsh gray light of a Seattle morning. A painful crick in my neck and the damp chill of the car settled deep in my bones. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then, the reality of my new life crashed down on me again. The funeral, the eviction, the cold vinyl of the driver's seat. I was 66 years old in a dead-end parking lot. With nothing else to do and nowhere to go, I reached for the only thing I had left in the world, the box of Leo's memories. My hands trembled as I sifted through the contents, a Little League trophy, a dog-eared copy of a science fiction novel, his graduation tassel. I needed to feel close to him. My fingers brushed against something hard and sharp at the bottom of the box, tucked beneath the wing of a purple model airplane we had built together 30 years ago. It was a small black USB flash drive. Taped to it was a label, written in Leo's familiar, precise handwriting. For Dad. Emergency use only. My heart hammered against my ribs. An emergency. This was certainly an emergency. I scrounged through my pockets and the car's ashtray, gathering a handful of loose change. It was just enough. I walked into a small, independent coffee shop, the smell of roasted beans and warm pastries, a painful reminder of a world I no longer belonged to. I bought the cheapest black coffee on the menu and asked the young barista if I could possibly borrow an old laptop they kept for customers. She looked at my disheveled state with pity, but nodded. I found a secluded corner and plugged in the drive. A single file appeared, locked with a password prompt. My mind raced. What could it be? His birthday? His mother's name? I tried them all. Access denied. My hope began to fade. What secret was so important? Then, another memory surfaced, a scruffy golden retriever puppy we'd brought home when Leo was 8. I typed in the dog's name, Maxwell. Access granted. The video file opened, and my son's face filled the screen. My breath hitched in my throat. He was thinner, paler, the illness having taken its toll, but his eyes held the same brilliant, determined spark they'd had since he was a boy. He was in his home office, the place Chloe now occupied. He smiled, a sad, knowing smile that shattered my heart all over again. "Dad," he began, his voice raspy but clear, "if you're watching this, it means Chloe did exactly what I was afraid of. It means she showed her true colors, and you're in trouble. I'm so sorry you have to go through this alone." Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the grimy keyboard. "But you're not alone," he continued, leaning closer to the camera. I spent months setting this up. I didn't fight cancer just to let her destroy what we built and hurt the person I love most. Don't worry. I made a plan. Your first step is to call this number. Text appeared on the screen. A name, Samuel Reed, and a phone number with a downtown Seattle area code. My son looked at me one last time from the screen. Trust him, Dad. He knows everything. This is just the beginning. The video ended, leaving me staring at the number through a blur of tears, a fragile, impossible hope igniting in my chest. Wearing the same wrinkled suit I'd been practically living in for 3 days, I felt entirely out of place walking into the downtown Seattle law firm of Baxter, Reed & Associates. The lobby whispered of quiet power and old money, a world away from the Greasy Spoon Cafe where I'd made the most important phone call of my life. I announced myself to the receptionist, expecting skepticism, but her expression was one of professional sympathy. Mr. Anderson, Mr. Reed is expecting you. Samuel Reed was a man in his 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a handshake that was both firm and reassuring. He didn't seem to notice my disheveled appearance, gesturing for me to sit in a leather chair overlooking the city. Your son, he began, his voice filled with genuine admiration, was one of the most brilliant and determined men I have ever had the privilege of representing. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. It was real. You worked with him on this? For the last 6 months, Mr. Anderson, Reed confirmed. Leaning forward, Leo anticipated this exact scenario. He knew Chloe's character, and he prepared for it with the same precision he used to design software. He then began to lay out the plan, the architecture of my son's final, brilliant project. It wasn't a simple will. It was a 2-part masterpiece. First, there was the will itself, Reed explained, which handles the distribution of personal assets. It is straightforward and legally sound. But the heart of Leo's plan, the engine, is something else entirely. The Innovate Dynamics Legacy Trust. He described how Leo had placed his entire controlling interest in his company into this irrevocable trust. A trust is governed by its own rules, its own charter, Reed said. And Leo drafted those rules very, very carefully. The trust includes what we refer to as an ethical conduct clause. It's a behavioral trigger designed to protect his legacy from those who do not share his values. I listened, mesmerized, as the sheer scale of my son's foresight unfolded before me. He hadn't just been dying, he'd been building. Your son didn't just build a company, Mr. Anderson, Reed said, his words echoing the pride I felt swelling in my chest. He built a fortress to protect you. And Chloe just walked willingly into the trap. Before I could fully process the implications, Reed slid a checkbook across the polished mahogany desk. Leo also set up a separate private account under my discretion for your immediate needs. He knew you would be left vulnerable. He wanted to ensure your dignity was restored immediately. He wrote out a check for an amount that made my hands tremble and pushed it toward me. Go rent a decent room, buy some new clothes, eat a proper meal. The battle is coming, and Leo wanted his father to face it as the man he is, not as a victim. Tears I didn't know I had left began to fall. My son had thought of everything, every single detail. I folded the check and placed it in my pocket. For the first time since Leo's death, I felt a solid floor beneath my feet. What happens now? I asked, my voice steady. Samuel Reed smiled, a slight, confident expression. Now we follow the blueprint. I've just sent out the summons. The formal will reading will be this Friday. The check from Samuel Reed felt like a weapon in my pocket. It bought me a clean, anonymous room in a modest, extended-stay hotel, a hot meal, and 3 new sets of clothes. For the first time in days, I felt like a man again, not a ghost. But dignity wasn't enough. I needed to understand what I was fighting against. On Wednesday, I made a call to David Carter, Leo's chief operating officer and his most trusted friend at the company. We met at a quiet diner, far from the gleaming towers of the tech district. David looked exhausted. He was a good man in his 40s who had believed in Leo's vision from day one. It's a nightmare, Michael, he said, stirring his coffee with a heavy hand. She walked in the day after the funeral, with him. Him? I asked. Marcus Thorne, a financial advisor with a reputation for hostile takeovers. They went straight into Leo's office. Chloe sat in his chair, put her feet up on his desk, and the first words out of her mouth were, "David, what's our current valuation and how quickly can we liquidate?" A cold rage, clean and sharp, cut through my grief. David continued, his voice low and disgusted. I tried to talk about ongoing projects, about Leo's 5-year plan, his legacy. She actually laughed. He looked me straight in the eyes. "I'm not exaggerating, Michael," she said, and I quote, "Legacy? Marcus, the only legacy I care about is the one that fits in a Swiss bank account." The words from the outline, the cruel dialogue I was supposed to hear, hit me like a physical blow. This was the reality. This was the woman my son had trusted. "They've spent the last 2 days meeting with acquisition brokers," David said, his jaw tight. "They're treating Innovate Dynamics like a garage sale, selling it off for parts to the highest bidder. The team is demoralized. We're losing people." It was worse than I imagined. She wasn't just greedy, she was a vandal, intent on smashing everything my son had built. "Then, yesterday afternoon," David said, leaning in, "a legal courier arrived, delivered a summons for both of them, for a will reading on Friday." I kept my face neutral, but my heart began to pound. "And?" David let out a bitter little laugh. Chloe didn't even flinch. She glanced at it, passed it to Thorne, and said, "Just a formality before I get everything." Then she tossed it onto a stack of papers like it was junk mail. "She has no idea what's coming, Michael. She's so confident, so arrogant. She's walking into an ambush and thinks she's heading to her coronation." We sat in silence for a moment. The diner's cheerful ambiance felt a world away. I now understood the full scope of Chloe's betrayal. This wasn't just about a house or money. This was about the soul of my son's life's work. My resolve hardened from hope into steel. Leo had built the fortress. Now, it was my job to make sure the gates came crashing down. On Thursday evening, the night before the will reading, I found sanctuary. Eleanor's small, warm apartment felt 1,000,000 miles away from the cold impersonality of my hotel room. The air was filled with the comforting scent of her famous beef stew, a smell that transported me back to happier times, to Sunday dinners, when my wife was still alive, and Leo would fill the room with his infectious laughter. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the quiet companionship, a balm on my frayed nerves. Eleanor, with her decades of nursing intuition, knew I needed to ground myself before I could talk. Finally, she put down her fork. "How are you holding up, Michael? Truly." I looked down at my hands. They were steady. The trembling that had plagued me since the funeral was gone. "I'm nervous, Elle," I admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if there's a loophole Leo didn't see?" The fear wasn't for myself anymore. It was the fear of failing my son, of letting his last, brilliant effort be in vain. "Stop that right now," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're talking about Leo Anderson, the boy who took apart our toaster at age 9 just to see how it worked, and then put it back together better than before. The man who built a multi-million-dollar company in 5 years. You think he left loopholes?" She reached across the table and patted my hand. "He inherited his mind from you, Michael. Meticulous, precise. He didn't miss a thing. He loved you too much to miss a thing." Her words were a lifeline. She was right. Doubting Leo was like doubting the laws of physics. My fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. This wasn't a gamble. It was the execution of a blueprint. I pushed my chair back and walked over to her mantelpiece, where an old photograph sat nestled amongst her family pictures. It was Leo at his college graduation, his arms slung around my shoulders, both of us grinning from ear to ear. He was so full of life, of potential, of a future that had been stolen from him. Chloe and Marcus weren't just trying to steal money. They were trying to erase him, to reduce his entire existence to a dollar amount they could cash in. A quiet fury settled over me. It wasn't the hot, chaotic anger of the first few days. This was a soldier's resolve. Leo had fought his battle with cancer. This was my battle to fight for him. I picked up the photo, tracing the outline of my son's smiling face. My mission was clear. "Tomorrow, I'm not just fighting for a house, Elle," I said, turning back to her, my voice low but steady. "I'm fighting for my son's soul." Eleanor simply nodded. her eyes shining with understanding. She knew I was ready. The grieving father was gone. In his place stood a man with one final sacred duty to perform. Friday morning arrived, not with the storm I expected, but with a cold, unnervingly bright sky. Eleanor and I arrived at Samuel Reed's office, 15 minutes early. The waiting room was a study in corporate sterility, mahogany walls, abstract art, and leather chairs so deep you could drown in them. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic 28 floors below. We sat side by side, a silent pact of solidarity between us. I felt no fear, only a profound, almost serene sense of purpose. I was a vessel for my son's final wish. The calm shattered precisely at 10 o'clock when the elevator doors slid open. Chloe and Marcus Thorne strode in as if they owned the building. She was wearing a sharp, black power suit that looked more appropriate for a corporate coronation than a will reading. He was the picture of a slick financial predator, his expensive shoes clicking arrogantly on the marble floor. They radiated an aura of absolute victory, a nauseating perfume of entitlement. Chloe spotted me immediately. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face as she and Marcus took the chairs directly opposite us, the wide empty space between us crackling with unspoken hostility. She surveyed my simple, clean suit, one of the few things I'd bought with Leo's money, with theatrical disdain. She leaned forward, pitching her voice just loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I hope you enjoy your last day of false hope, Michael. It must be expensive." The barb was meant to wound me, to provoke a reaction. A week ago, it would have. I would have felt the sting of shame, the heat of anger. But today, her words felt like pebbles thrown against a fortress wall. I heard Samuel Reed's advice echoing in my mind. Let her talk. Let her show everyone exactly who she is. So I held her gaze and remained silent. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I simply looked at her, and in that moment, I felt not anger, but a profound, almost chilling sense of pity. She was sitting there, basking in the glow of a victory she thought was hers, utterly blind to the fact that she was a pawn in a game my son had finished months ago. She was a ghost, haunting a future that had already been written without her in it. My silence seemed to unnerve her more than any angry retort could have. A flicker of irritation crossed her face before she composed herself, turning to whisper something to Marcus. The tension in the room became a physical presence, a weight pressing down on us all. Eleanor discreetly placed a calming hand on my arm. The seconds ticked by, each one a lifetime. This was it. The final moments of peace before the storm broke. Just as the silence became unbearable, the grand door to the conference room swung open. Samuel Reed's legal secretary, a poised woman in her 60s, stood in the doorway. She looked at us, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Reed is ready for you now." The conference room was long and imposing, dominated by a dark wood table polished to a mirror shine. Through a wall of glass, the Seattle skyline stood as a silent, indifferent witness. Samuel Reed sat at the head of the table, an island of calm professionalism. Eleanor and I sat on one side, Chloe and Marcus Thorne on the other. A small recording device on the table was the only sound, its soft hum amplifying the crushing silence. Reed cleared his throat and began, his voice formal and steady. "This is the formal reading of the last will and testament of Leo Michael Anderson, dated 4 months prior to his passing. All previous wills are hereby revoked." He went through the preliminary legal language, each word making my stomach tighten. I risked a glance at Chloe. She was leaning forward slightly, a predator poised to strike, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "First," Reed said, turning a page, "to my wife, Chloe Anderson, I bequeath the following." He listed the assets. The house in Seattle, the 2 luxury cars, the contents of all personal checking and savings accounts. As he spoke, a slow, triumphant smirk spread across Chloe's face. She cast a venomous, pitying look in my direction, a silent confirmation of her victory. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with an air of finality. "It was over," her posture screamed. "The old man gets nothing." Marcus patted her arm in congratulations. I felt Eleanor's hand squeeze my own under the table, a small gesture of support. I focused on my breathing, remembering Leo's face in the video, his calm assurance. "Trust the plan, Dad." Reed paused, took a sip of water, and turned another page. Next, he continued, his tone unchanged, we address the matter of my company, Innovate Dynamics, and my entire controlling interest therein. Chloe was already looking at her phone, barely paying attention now that her prize was secured. I bequeath 100% of my shares, voting rights, and all associated dividends and properties of Innovate Dynamics to my father, Michael Anderson. The silence that followed was a physical shockwave. Chloe's head snapped up, her smirk vanishing as if it had been slapped from her face. Marcus Thorne's jaw went slack. Eleanor gasped, softly beside me. I felt the blood rush to my head, the sheer audacity of my son's move stealing my breath. $35 million. He had given it all to me. What? Chloe's voice was a strangled whisper, then a piercing shriek. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. No, that's impossible. She pointed a trembling finger at me. This is a joke. That company is worth millions. He tricked him. My husband was sick, dying. This old man took advantage of him. Her accusations filled the room, ugly and desperate. I remained silent, looking not at her, but at Samuel Reed, who hadn't even flinched. He simply waited for her tirade to run out of steam. When she finally paused for breath, he looked at her over the rim of his glasses, his expression impassive. Please, sit down, Mrs. Anderson, he said, his voice cutting through her hysteria with surgical precision. We have not yet discussed the legacy trust that governs these shares. Chloe sank back into her chair, her face pale with rage, but she was silenced by the sheer authority in Samuel Reed's voice. He adjusted his tie, his movements deliberate. As I was saying, he continued calmly, the shares of Innovate Dynamics bequeathed to Mr. Anderson are held within the Innovate Dynamics Legacy Trust. The trust is the true legal owner of the company, and its charter, drafted by Leo, is absolute. Marcus Thorne scoffed. A trust? That's just legal paperwork. It changes nothing. On the contrary, Reed said, picking up a final, slender document. It changes everything. He then began to read from the trust's charter. His voice filled the silent room. The trust is established to preserve the ethical and innovative spirit of its founder. As such, it contains a specific ethical conduct clause. This clause states that any and all assets willed to a beneficiary, including those outside the trust, are conditional upon that beneficiary upholding the core family values of the founder. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Specifically, any action taken by a beneficiary that intentionally inflicts material or emotional harm upon the founder's immediate family, namely, his father, Michael Anderson, will trigger an immediate and irrevocable forfeiture of all bequeathed assets. I watched Chloe's face. The confusion was warring with her anger. That's ridiculous. You can't enforce that, she spat. That's where you're wrong, Reed said. He calmly turned his laptop around to face her. Leo had a security system installed at the house last year. He was very thorough. On the screen, a grainy but clear video began to play. It was the front porch. It was me, standing in the rain. And it was her, Chloe, shoving the boxes at me, her face a mask of cold fury, before slamming the door in my face. The color drained from her cheeks. The video was undeniable. It was a recording of her own cruelty. Reed turned the laptop back to himself. On the day of your husband's funeral, you evicted his grieving father, leaving him homeless. This act, Mrs. Anderson, triggered the ethical conduct clause. He looked her directly in the eye, his voice like the fall of a guillotine. Effective immediately, the house, the vehicles, and the contents of the personal bank accounts are forfeited by you and are absorbed directly into the legacy trust, of which, he added, gesturing to me, your father-in-law is the sole beneficiary. You get nothing. It was the single most devastating checkmate I had ever witnessed. But my son had one last thing to say. Leo also wanted you to see this, Reed said, clicking a file. My boy's face appeared on the large screen on the wall. He looked directly into the camera, his gaze piercing. Chloe, he said, his voice a mixture of sorrow and steel. If you are seeing this, it means you failed the one simple test of character I left for you. I loved you, but I knew your nature. He took a breath. I gambled on your greed, Chloe, and you did not disappoint. Goodbye. The screen went blank. A strangled, animalistic sound escaped Chloe's throat. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and she slumped forward, collapsing in a heap on the floor. Marcus Thorne scrambled to her side as Eleanor rushed to call for paramedics. And I just sat there, motionless, overwhelmed by the fierce, protective, and utterly brilliant love of my son. He had won. From beyond the grave, he had won. The month that followed the will reading was a blur of legal motions and procedural maneuvers. As Samuel Reed had predicted, Chloe, funded by what little she had left and the backing of Marcus Thorne, fought like a cornered animal. They filed every motion imaginable: undue influence, diminished mental capacity, fraudulent inducement. It was a desperate, expensive attempt to undo the inevitable. I spent the month in my quiet hotel room, letting Reed handle the storm. He was, as Leo had known, a fortress. The final hearing was not in a grand conference room, but a sterile, impersonal courtroom. It lasted less than an hour. I sat in the public gallery with Eleanor, watching as Chloe's high-priced lawyer made one last, impassioned plea. It was a fine performance, full of righteous indignation, but it was hollow. It was fiction. When he finished, the judge, a stern woman in her 60s with eyes that missed nothing, looked down at the mountain of evidence before her. She didn't hesitate. The court has reviewed the extensive documentation, the depositions, and the video evidence provided, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. The final wishes of the testator, Leo Anderson, are exceptionally clear. The will and the associated legacy trust are meticulously crafted and legally ironclad. She looked directly at Chloe's lawyer. This court will not entertain frivolous challenges against a testator's clear and meticulously planned final wishes. The petition is denied. Case dismissed. The gavel fell with a crack that echoed the finality of a closing coffin. It was over. Truly, finally over. We all filed out into the marble hallway. Chloe stood for a moment, looking smaller and shockingly fragile without her armor of arrogance. Her expensive suit seemed to hang off her. She looked at Marcus Thorne, her eyes pleading. He simply adjusted his silk tie, gave her a curt, dismissive nod, and walked away without a backward glance. Their alliance, built on greed, had dissolved the moment the money was gone. She was alone, the architect of her own ruin. She saw me watching her. For a split second, our eyes met. There was no fire in her gaze anymore, only the cold, dead ash of defeat. Then she turned and walked away, a solitary figure disappearing into the anonymous courthouse crowd. There was no triumph in watching her go, only a profound sense of waste. Samuel Reed walked over, a thick folder in his hand. "The official court order, Michael," he said, handing it to me. "It's all yours now, free and clear." I took the folder. The papers inside felt heavy, not with the weight of money, but with the weight of responsibility. I had fulfilled my duty to my son. I had seen his plan through to the end. I nodded to Reed, a silent thank you for his unwavering skill and loyalty. Together, we walked out of the courthouse and into the bright afternoon Sunday. The path forward was clear, and for the first time, it felt like my own. The day after the court ruling, I drove back to the house on Maple Street. It was the same drive I had made in a desperate, aimless haze just over a month ago, but now, everything felt different. The Seattle sky was a crisp, clear blue, and the key in my hand didn't feel like a foreign object. It felt like my own. I parked my old Honda in the same driveway, where Chloe's silver Mercedes had once gleamed, and walked up the familiar porch steps. The key slid into the lock, and turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Silence. The grand entryway, which Chloe had filled with sterile, modern art and impossibly fragile glass sculptures, was now bare. Echoes were the only residents. She had taken everything she considered hers, leaving behind only the shell of a home. But in doing so, she had given it back to me. The house could breathe again. It could be Leo's house once more. I walked slowly from room to room, each step a pilgrimage through memory. In the living room, I could almost hear Leo's laughter as we watched old sci-fi movies on the big screen he'd been so proud of. I ran my hand along the cold marble of the kitchen counter. remembering the frustrating, loving effort of trying to cook something, anything, that my son could keep down during his final weeks. His office, which Chloe had immediately claimed, was now empty save for the built-in bookshelves he had designed himself. It was a blank slate, waiting for a new purpose. The journey was bittersweet, a quiet dance with the ghosts of joy and sorrow that inhabited every corner. I felt Leo's presence here more strongly than I had at his grave. This house wasn't a place of death. It was the catalogue of his life, his achievements, his love. Finally, I made my way to the back of the house, to the one door I had been almost afraid to open, the workshop, the gift he had given me, the space I'd barely had time to use. I turned the knob and stepped inside, and I stopped. Everything was exactly as we had left it. The scent of sawdust and machine oil hung in the air. My tools were neatly arranged on the pegboard. Blueprints for a small bookshelf I'd been planning were still laid out on the main table. And there, sitting under a dust cover in the center of the workbench, was the P-51 Mustang model airplane. It was half-finished, its wings still waiting for their final coat of defiant purple paint. This was the one place her influence hadn't touched. This was our sanctuary. It was the physical manifestation of my son's promise to me, a space built from love and foresight. I pulled up the old wooden stool, the one Leo used to sit on as a boy while watching me work. I sat down, the silence of the workshop wrapping around me like a warm blanket. I looked at the unfinished model, a symbol of a life's work interrupted, and a future I now had to build on my own. 6 months passed. The Seattle rain gave way to a gentle spring, and with the changing seasons, a new purpose took root in my life. I wasn't just the guardian of my son's fortune, I was the steward of his legacy. As the new chairman of the board at Innovate Dynamics, my first official act wasn't to maximize profits, but to redefine what profit meant. I stood before the board, a group of sharp, intelligent people who had respected my son, and laid out my plan. Leo believed technology should serve humanity, I announced, my voice steady. Therefore, a significant portion of our profits will now fund the Leo Anderson Legacy Scholarship Fund, providing full rides for engineering students from working-class families. The board didn't just approve, they gave a standing ovation. We were no longer just a tech company. We were a launchpad for dreams. A few weeks later, I sat in Leo's old office. Now my office for a video call that mattered more to me than any business deal. On the screen was a bright-eyed young woman named Maria. She was the first recipient of the scholarship, a brilliant mind from a family that could never have afforded a top-tier university. She spoke with a passion that reminded me so much of my son. "Mr. Anderson," she said, her voice thick with emotion, I don't know how to thank you. My father works 2 jobs. I never thought this would be possible." "You earned it, Maria," I told her, my own voice catching. "You just focus on building a better world. That's all Leo would have wanted." She smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "Mr. Anderson, because of your son, my dream is possible. I will make him proud." After the call, I sat quietly, looking out at the city. She would make him proud. Innovate Dynamics, under my guidance with David Carter as CEO, had shifted its focus. We were now developing affordable assistive technologies for the elderly and educational software for underprivileged schools. We were building things that mattered, just as Leo had always intended. The company was more successful than ever. It turned out that having a soul was good for business. That evening, I returned to the workshop. It had become my sanctuary, a place for quiet reflection. The scent of sawdust and oil was the smell of home. I picked up the half-finished P-51 Mustang model, the one we had started together. Over the past few months, I had worked on it piece by piece, a form of meditation, a way of communing with my son's memory. Now, only one task remained. I opened a small pot of paint. It was a vibrant, defiant purple. With a steady hand and a small brush, I applied the final coat to the plane's wings. The color was as bright and unconventional as my son's spirit. I placed the finished model on a high shelf, letting it catch the last rays of the evening Sunday. It was perfect. The fight was over. The grief was still there, a quiet companion that would walk with me for the rest of my days, but it was no longer a crushing weight. It was a reminder of a love so powerful it had reached back from the grave to build a future. My son had taken care of me, just as he had promised. And now, it was my turn to take care of his legacy. Michael's story is a powerful reminder that a person's true legacy isn't written in a bank statement, but in the lives they touch and the values they instill. It shows us that foresight born from love is the ultimate form of protection, a shield that can guard our loved ones even after we are gone. Leo's plan was more than just a clever legal strategy. It was the final act of a devoted son, a testament to the fact that integrity and character are the only assets that can truly endure. Greed builds houses of cards, but love builds fortresses that stand the test of time. It makes you wonder about the legacies we are all building, day by day. Who are the people whose love has been a fortress for you? And what is the story you want to be told about you when you're no longer here to tell it yourself? If this story of a son's undying love and a father's quiet strength resonated with you, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We are dedicated to bringing you more stories that explore the depths of family, justice, and the human heart. Please share your thoughts on Leo's brilliant plan in the comments below. We read and value every single one.